Okay, what's happening, people? Let me know if you can hear me loud and clear in the chat. I saw somebody say nobody cares in the chat. I guess that's in relation to Canelo and Turkey Usyk apparently squashing their beef. Well, maybe nobody does care, but we'll see, right? As soon as you said that and I saw that there was literally no views on the video, I know it's an impromptu live, as most of my lives are, but still, if nobody cares, then I have to resort to making the live stream title about Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, because AJ has basically officially called out Fury now at the Ring Magazine Awards. I didn't want to make that the main topic of the stream. I'd rather talk about other stuff, but if people aren't interested in Canelo and Turkey Usyk squashing their beef, then it is what it is. But shout out to everybody in the chat. Shout out to Dominic A, Negus, Olu, Danny, JDM, Anthony, Swaggins, Terrence, Zizu, Team Batman Boxing, Feed Khabib. Feed Khabib says nobody in boxing can have beef with Turkey. In 2026, he'll be running the whole damn show. Bend the knee and kiss the ring. Like Terrence Crawford, Canelo, Usyk, etc. Tank will be next. We'll see. Shout out to Dominic. Oluwasei, am I pronouncing your name right? Probably not. I'm normally okay with Nigerian names, but Oluwasei. We got Feeney, big up. He says, I'm off to bed. It's almost 3 a.m. here in Nairobi, Kenya. Okay, shout out to Feeney over there in Kenya. Earth Summed Up says, wasn't Fury at the Ring Magazine Awards? I'm not sure. Maybe not. See, Tyson Fury doesn't tend to go to those kind of things unless he's the center of attention. And since he's coming off a loss, or 2 losses, he won't be the center of attention, will he? So I'd be surprised if he was there, to be fair. Team Batman Boxing says Turkey making huge moves. Shout out to Funny Faces. Shout out to Grind. Okay, shout out to everybody in the chat. Aiden Woods is here again. Big up Aiden Woods. He says fair play to Usyk. Won like 3 awards out of the 10. All right, let's talk some boxing here, folks. Got a few things to talk about. Just getting myself situated here. All right, first and foremost, Anthony Joshua on his Instagram page put this up, as you can see, looking for this man tonight at Ring Magazine. So I guess Anthony Joshua was hoping that Tyson Fury would be at the Ring Magazine Awards. To my knowledge, Fury wasn't there. Perhaps he was invited, I don't know. Let me know let me know if Fury was there, if any of you guys know, but I haven't seen any clips of Fury appearing to be there or anything like that, so I'm going to assume that Fury wasn't there. But anyway, AJ put this up, looking for this man tonight. And then he did an interview with Adeola Depot where he doubled down on his desire to face Tyson Fury. And you can see from this Ring Magazine Instagram post, they're quoting Anthony Joshua. That's my target in 2025. I'm targeting Tyson Fury. So he has made it official. He's not ambiguous, because sometimes AJ is very ambiguous about what he wants to do and who he wants to fight and what his next move is going to be. But in this case, completely unambiguous, says he wants to fight Tyson Fury. It is what it is. Now, you guys know that I, at this stage, am kind of indifferent about whether this fight happens or not, because it doesn't carry the significance that it did several years ago when both guys were still world champions. Because at that stage, it would have been the undisputed fight. It would have been the fight to decide who the best heavyweight in the world is. And it also would have been the fight to decide who the best heavyweight in the UK is. Today, it's none of those things. So it doesn't carry the same significance. However, since they've had such a long-standing rivalry, going all the way back to when AJ was an amateur, actually, because AJ sparred Tyson Fury, and Fury admitted in an interview with Steve Bunce that AJ beat him up. So that's where it started. It didn't seem as though it was a rivalry at the time, because Tyson Fury was actually bigging AJ up at that point in that interview. Obviously, once AJ went on to achieve things as an amateur turned pro, then it developed into a rivalry. And so, because of the back and forth between them over the years and the back and forth between the two sets of fans, some people, many people actually, are still very keen to see this fight, just to put the rivalry to bed once and for all. Kind of like Amir Khan and Kell Brook. Even though that fight happened way past its sell-by date, there was still plenty of interest, and I'm sure there'd still be plenty of interest in this, just for the bragging rights between fans, if nothing else. And as I've said previously, if, let's say, Tyson Fury were to win and beat Anthony Joshua, assuming this fight takes place, even though AJ is completely washed, in my opinion, at this stage, the Tyson Fury fans would claim that, well, this is what Fury would have done to AJ all along, and vice versa. If AJ were to beat Fury, the AJ fans will be saying, well, this is what AJ would have done to Tyson Fury all along. This is why the fight didn't happen earlier on in their careers. You see? So for bragging rights among the fan bases, this will still be a popular matchup to make. So what do you guys think in the comments? Will it get made now that AJ's officially and formally called Fury out? Or will Fury not really be thinking about boxing right now off the back of 2 defeats against Usyk? Will he come out and say something like, I'm not interested in fighting somebody that just got chinned. I want to target maybe a 3rd fight with Usyk or Daniel Dubois, although Fury's team don't seem very keen on the Dubois fight for some weird reason. It's an in-house fight. Both guys are with Frank Warren. I don't know why they wouldn't be keen on that fight. Is it a case of Tyson Fury, as usual, only wanting the best as far as risk reward? And if he can't get, crazy sums of money for taking a risk, then he'd rather just fight a 4th matchup with Derek Chisora? Is it that kind of thing going on? You guys let me know what you think about that as well. Let's just turn it over to the chat. Team Batman Boxing says, I think it still happens. 24 says, not interested in this, to be honest. Fair enough. Jimbo says, they played AJ getting knocked out at least 15 times. Old Femi must have been embarrassed. What, at the Ring Awards, did they? That's crazy. They kept playing AJ getting knocked out. Berserker says, Luke Partridge KOs AJ in 2 rounds. Yeah, it wouldn't shock me, to be honest, after what happened to AJ against Dubois, because AJ doesn't have the mental strength of some of the other top heavyweights. And he never really recovered psychologically from the Andy Ruiz fight, the first one, obviously, in my opinion. And so if it took him all those years and he still couldn't get over the ghosts of Andy Ruiz, and those ghosts were compounded by the 2 defeats to Usyk, just imagine how many ghosts, just imagine how many demons are in Anthony Joshua's mind now, following that devastating KO defeat to Daniel Dubois. And so with all that going on in his head, he goes in there against the Tyson Fury, who always fights confident, or at least more confident than AJ fights. Yeah, if Fury sticks it on him early enough, then maybe he gets him out of there early. The only thing is, that Tyson Fury's punch resistance, I don't think, is quite what it used to be either. Yes, he still recovers well, but he can be dropped. And if AJ catches Tyson Fury with something clean, he'll drop him. I've got no doubt about that. He'll drop him if he catches him with something clean with proper power behind it. But yeah, I would favor Tyson Fury in the fight as well. You know, based upon recent performances, Fury appears to have a lot more left, which is kind of surprising given the amount of tough fights that Fury's been in. But then again, as I say, AJ's coming off a devastating KO defeat. All right, we got 264 concurrent viewers. If you guys can all stick a like on the live stream, it will be really appreciated. It helps visibility. I like to try and keep the viewers to likes ratio at least 50%, and we're way below that right now. So please help me out and stick a like on the video. It only takes a split second to do it. Feeney says, Hatman, what did you think of the Ring Magazine Awards? I haven't seen it all yet, to be fair. I've just seen a few bits and pieces, and that's what I'm streaming about here. King KO says, Usyk shouted out Greedy Belly. Maybe I'll do another stream tomorrow talking about the actual awards in depth. But I've just seen certain things, certain highlights and whatever, which I'm talking about tonight. Aiden says, if Fury struggled with the athleticism of Ngannou, he would struggle with AJ. I hear what you're saying, but Ngannou was confident against Tyson Fury. If AJ goes in there confident, then maybe he can give Fury some trouble. But that's the thing. AJ doesn't fight confident. He certainly didn't against Daniel Dubois. So shout out to all the new watchers, viewers joining the stream. If you can all stick a like on the video, it really helps with visibility. We've only got 68 likes so far. Need to get to at least, let's call it 140. Need 140 likes. So let's get them likes up, people. Much appreciated and thanks in advance. Ocean Blue says, can't fight Partridge with Sassoon in his corner. Yeah, that's one of the issues, isn't it? It's the Ben Davison situation. Personally, I wouldn't trust Ben Davison in Anthony Joshua's corner for that fight. Split loyalties. Shout out to Matt for the super chat. He says, I'll watch the Fury Joshua fight. I give him a better shot against Fury than I would have in a Dubois rematch. Fury isn't as youthful. You know what? I probably agree with you on that. Yeah, I'll probably agree with you on that, Matt, that AJ may have a better chance against Fury than he would in a Dubois rematch. I agree with that. One, because it's a different fighter, different style. Fury isn't as aggressive as Dubois. It doesn't hit as hard as Dubois. And two, I think AJ has always fancied the Fury fight. I think he's always maybe played it out in his mind in terms of what he would do and how he would go about fighting Fury. And it probably is something similar to the way he sparred Fury back in the days. I personally suspect AJ's always felt as though, and I'm not saying it's going to be the case, but I suspect he's always felt as though that he had Fury's number. So yeah, I think AJ would have a better chance against Fury than he would in a Dubois rematch. I 100% agree with you on that. But I would still pick Fury to win based on recent form. Shout out to someone for the super chat. He says, big up Hatman. Fury isn't some defensive guru, and Joshua will be the biggest puncher he's faced in years. I think AJ chins Luke. Okay. That would be a turn up for the books. I would be surprised, to be honest with you, based on recent form. It's not that AJ doesn't have certain abilities and certain tools to give Tyson Fury problems. It's whether he has the confidence to use those tools effectively. That's the thing. And coming off the back of that Dubois defeat, I'm just not sure whether he's going to have that kind of confidence. But if the fight takes place, we'll find out. Maybe AJ pulls off the upset. I mean, what a turn up that would be. Imagine AJ after getting chinned by Dubois in such devastating fashion, embarrassing fashion for him, fights Tyson Fury in his next bout and chins him. That would be crazy. Shout out to Jake Lee for the super chat. He said, would you consider making a video ranking the 10 best heavyweights of all time based on their resume? I'm assuming Usyk probably wouldn't make it. The problem with those kind of lists is, let's say the top 5 can be relatively easily worked out, but once you get outside of the top 5, it becomes very, very subjective. But yeah, I'd definitely consider doing it. Thank you for the super chat. Because, for example, a guy like Evander Holyfield, and I'm going to come to Matt's super chat in a second. Shout out to Matt. A guy like Evander Holyfield, right? Where do you put him in the top 10 heavyweights of all time? Because you think about it, he beat Mike Tyson. He beat Riddick Bowe. 2 great wins, particularly the Mike Tyson win, or beat Mike Tyson twice. But then he lost to Lennox Lewis. He lost to Michael Moorer. Later on in his career, he lost to John Ruiz. You know, where do you put him? He was undisputed, obviously, and he had several defenses. You know, after beating Buster Douglas, he beat George Foreman, another one, obviously an old version of George Foreman. And he did avenge the Michael Moorer defeat when they fought a second time. But yeah, a guy like him, and it's kind of the same issue with Usyk's resume. It's like, well, actually, no. Holyfield had a more extensive championship run at heavyweight than Usyk. But it still wasn't like a Lennox Lewis championship run. It still wasn't like a Joe Louis or a Muhammad Ali, you know? Some fighters have a really dense resume where they have a lot of big names crammed into a relatively short number of fights. But other fighters, like, again, Muhammad Ali, he's got a much longer resume, which spans like 2 decades of championship fights. Over 20. I think Muhammad Ali had close to 25 championship fights, something like that. And he's got the quality in there and the quantity. And so when you're judging on resume, I take longevity into account, because even though most people focus on the big names, upsets happen because sometimes a guy takes his eye off the ball, and sometimes he comes up against the style, which, you know, maybe isn't a fighter that is considered to be particularly great, but it's a style that for whatever reason he finds it difficult to deal with. With Muhammad Ali, that was Ken Norton. Now, Ken Norton was a good fighter, but he was no, you know, he certainly wasn't one of the greatest heavyweights of all time. Let's just put it that way. But for whatever reason, Muhammad Ali just could not get to grips with his style. Yeah, so longevity, you know, if you have a long reign at the top, you're eventually going to come across all sorts of different styles. And if you manage to overcome them all, then that means something. That elevates you higher, in my book, in terms of your resume. But yeah, shout out for the super chat to Jake Lee. I'll definitely consider doing that video. Shout out to Matt again for the super chat. He says, is there any viable evidence to suggest that UK fighters tend to statistically have glassier chins and smaller gas tanks than European counterparts? Okay, that's an interesting question. Is there any evidence to say that UK fighters statistically have glassier chins and smaller gas tanks than European counterparts? By European, I guess you mean Eastern European. I don't know whether there's been any stats done on it, but this was kind of a trope that Americans used to have about British fighters back in the days, particularly British heavyweights. They would say that British heavyweights can't take a punch. They've all got a glass jaw. They coined a phrase. I forget which writer came up with it, but they coined a term or a phrase, the horizontal heavyweight. And they would use that phrase for British heavyweight specifically, the horizontal British heavyweight. Right, horizontal because they always line on their back. And so this was the idea. If you're British, you can't take a shot, which I never really understood, because taking a punch has nothing to do with what part of the world you were born in. You know, like which landmass you happen to be born on. I don't get what the correlation is between, you know, taking a punch, in my view, is mostly a physical thing, but there is a psychological element to it as well. So I'm going to throw out some arbitrary percentages here. I would say taking a punch is probably about 70%, you know, 60 to 70% physical, and the rest is mental. So if you're not confident enough, if you've got demons, if you're too nervous, etc., that can affect the way you take a shot. That can affect the way your body reacts when you get hit clean. But there are certain guys who are just naturally physically robust. And I'm talking about the first day they ever set foot in a boxing gym and get in the ring and get hit bang on the chin, they can take a shot. Do you know what I mean? Like growing up, you know, I grew up in a rough environment, loads of street fights, you know, it was a common thing back then. And there were certain guys in street fights who could always take a great shot. You know, you see them hit with weapons and stuff like that, and they wouldn't even fall to the floor. So I think it's mostly a physical thing. So anyway, as far as British fighters not being able to take a shot, I think that this trope developed in America mainly due to the fact that Britain obviously has a much smaller population than America. So in America, especially back then in the 80s and 90s, the pool of fighters is so big, you're obviously going to find more guys with good chins inside that pool of fighters because there's just more of them. So statistically, you know, it is what it is. But in terms of the overall percentage, we're not talking about numbers now, overall numbers, because again, there are going to be more guys with good chins in America because there's more people. It's a larger population. But in terms of what percentage of fighters in the UK have good chins as opposed to America, I don't think it will be dramatically different. The only thing I will say is, when it comes to Mexican fighters, they appear, again, I haven't done any stats on this, but they appear to take a better shot than most other ethnicities. And I don't know why that is. Is it something physical about Mexican people? I don't know. Is it a toughening process that they go through from a very young age? So when they're kids and they're fighting, their body gets used to taking shots, and that kind of influences the way their brain and their physiology develops. And so by the time they reach adulthood, they're teak tough. Could it be that? I don't know. But from watching boxing over the years, Mexican fighters seem to take a shot better than most other ethnicities in general. Okay, that's just unsubstantiated observation, right? But as far as the European fighters, I mean, which European fighters are you talking about specifically? Because you're comparing, you know, British fighters' chins and their gas tank to European fighters. I mean, when it comes to gas tank, that is something where there might be a bit more to it, because that comes down to, yes, physiology to an extent, but also the way that you train. And I've long been a pretty stern critic of the way that British trainers coach fighters. For me, there's too much of an emphasis on work rate when it comes to British trainers, the way that they train fighters in general. There's too much of an emphasis on work rate, you know, throwing a million punches, and not enough emphasis on quality. And also the mindset that a lot of trainers in Britain try to get fighters into, I don't think is conducive to punching hard, thinking clearly, or having great stamina, to be honest. One of the things that I've never liked about British trainers is the way that they always scream and shout. I'm not saying all of them, okay, but a lot of them, they scream and shout when they're taking fighters on the pads and all this type of stuff. They try to get the fighter in some type of like hyper mindset, you know, and generally speaking, I don't think that's a good thing. You don't want a fighter in a hyper mindset when they're training or sparring or doing anything like that. No, you want them mentally calm. Okay, so all the shouting and screaming, throw left hand, right hand, uppercut. No, you don't want to fight. I know maybe you're trying to motivate them, but compare the way that British trainers train fighters in the gym with all that shouting and screaming. And I'm generalizing here because not all British trainers do it. But compare it to the way that you see Mexican trainers training their fighters, or even better still, Eastern European trainers. When they're training their fighters, they're very calm. There's no shouting and screaming, right? The ones I've seen anyway. There's an emphasis on technique. And here's the thing, if your technique is good enough, you don't need to throw a million punches. If you're accurate enough, and if you hit hard enough, you're not required to, you know, have this ridiculous punch output. And a good example of what I'm talking about is the Usyk Fury fights. Because although Usyk outlanded Fury in both fights, Fury actually threw more punches. And he's the bigger man. So the bigger man threw more but landed less. That's what technique can do for you. Usyk landed significantly more both times, but threw less. You see? So that is, as far as I'm concerned, an example of the difference. Obviously, Tyson Fury is trained by Sugar Hill, who's an American trainer. But the way that Eastern Europeans in general train, there's an emphasis on quality and technique over quantity. Once your technique is solid, once it's, sharp and you've got it as good as you think you can possibly get it, although it's a never-ending thing, really. I mean, you look at a guy like Usyk and he's an absolute perfectionist, and you have to be that way. But once your technique is at a certain level, then you can start upping the punch output. The issue I've always had with British trainers is they're trying to get you to throw loads of punches from the first day you walk in the gym. I just don't think that's the right approach. I think you need to concentrate on technique first, and not until the technique is damn near perfect do you then start upping the work rate. You see? Anyway, shout out for super chat. Got a super chat here from Alex. Much appreciated. He says, what accent has Amir Khan got? He talks funny. He's got a Bolton accent. Bolton is a town in Greater Manchester in the north of England. And that's the way they talk there. That's the way they talk. You know, England is, or Britain is a relatively small country geographically. But because it's such an old nation, the accents vary dramatically from one part of the country to the next, far more so than in a younger country like the United States, for example. So in the United States, yes, there is variation in accent. You know, the New York accent doesn't sound like the California accent. The Texas accent doesn't sound like, you know, Florida or wherever. But the difference in accent in America is nowhere, even though it's a much bigger country than the UK, the difference in accents is nowhere near as dramatic as it is in Britain. So a Scottish accent sounds nothing like a London accent. A Bristol accent sounds nothing like a Newcastle accent. A Manchester accent sounds nothing like a Liverpool accent, despite the fact that those two cities are very close to each other. Okay, so yeah, the accents in Britain are very interesting because they're so dramatically different. And again, it speaks to how old Britain is as a nation. Obviously, you had communities living in, in the Middle Ages and whatever, even the Renaissance period. A lot of people never left their local village or their local town. A lot of people would stay there and live there their whole lives and never go anywhere. That's how these accents ended up developing over the centuries. A shout out for the super chat to Alex. Another super chat here from George. He says, dream boxer and coach combo example, Froch and Roach. For me, I would say Manny Stewart and Tommy Hearns was a great combination. Manny Stewart and Lennox Lewis. Eddie Foch and Joe Frazier was a good combination. Coach, he says, you're contradicting yourself, Hatman. First, you say a fighter's chin has nothing to do with the landmass they're from. Then you say Mexicans appear to have better chins. I'm not contradicting myself at all. You're just showing the limits of your understanding. I'm not talking about landmass when I talk about Mexicans. I'm talking about their phenotype. I'm talking about them physically. A black fighter from the UK has the exact same phenotype as a black fighter from America. A white fighter from the UK has the same phenotype as a white fighter from America. Can't you tell the difference between ethnicity and nationality? So you're showing your lack of understanding here. And I wasn't contradicting myself at all. Mexicans as an ethnicity might have something about their physiology that allows them to take a better shot than, let's say, African Americans or white Americans or whatever the case may be. That's what I'm saying. Nothing to do with landmass. But, back in the days, a black fighter from Britain, the American press would instantly say, well, he obviously can't take a shot because he's from Britain. And I'm like, hang on, he's black, and the black American fighters are the same race, but somehow you say they can take a shot? It don't make any sense. Afro Jam says, I think diet and genes play a role. Yeah, I think it's mostly a physical thing. It's mostly a physical thing. It's mostly to do with a genetic lottery. But as I say, I think certain ethnicities in general take a better shot. And I think Mexicans are an example of it, personally. Shout out to Workstation for the super chat. He says, my kickboxing coach uses that tactic when I'm training in the gym. It helped me to relax and concentrate during the minute break. I guess you're referring to something I was saying regarding coaching techniques. But yeah, starting off, perfecting the technique before you up the work rate. I think that's the way to go. Rather than getting people in the gym and immediately trying to get them to throw a million punches. I've never liked that approach. It just seems counterintuitive to me. Because especially when you're dealing with young kids, the way that you teach them when they're young, it tends to kind of mold them. It molds their not only muscle memory, but the way that they think about boxing and the way that they feel when they're throwing punches. So you have to teach them the right way from the beginning, or else later down the line, you're going to have to try and undo all of the mistakes. And that's very, very difficult when somebody's been fighting a particular way and thinking a particular way for a number of years. So yeah, the way that the Eastern European coaches do it, from what I've seen, is they emphasize technique long before they get you throwing a million punches. Oh wow, the Joker says Bacoli just said on his ex, that Turkey has offered him a big opportunity for this year. Think it might be Bakole versus AJ in Africa later on in the year. Interesting. All right, we've got a few other things to talk about here. Just make sure I've got everybody's super chats. Don't think I've read everyone's super chat so far. All right. So, this was interesting to me. I read this in a TalkSport article. I think it's from the interview that Turki Al-Sheikh did with Carl Froch. Not sure if you guys have seen that. But yeah, Carl Froch on his YouTube channel has interviewed Turki Al-Sheikh. And Turki Al-Sheikh is quoted as saying, for Alexander Usyk, he will wait for the card of February. He has said he wants to fight 1 or 2 fights more. And I would like to see the Dubois rematch. So if this is accurate from Turki Al-Sheikh, Alexander Usyk actually is looking to retire sooner rather than later. And personally, I think that will be a wise decision. Knowing what Usyk is like, the type of mentality he has, I'm not at all surprised if he wants to fight Daniel Dubois for a second time. Because when he was at cruiserweight, he didn't move up to heavyweight before fighting Tony Bellew. Bear in mind, Bellew didn't have a belt. Usyk was undisputed. But because Tony Bellew had a claim to being the #1 cruiserweight in the world, because he never lost his belt in the ring, he obviously moved up to heavyweight to fight David Haye, right? So because he had this claim, Usyk was like, okay, I want to leave no stone unturned. I'm going to hang around a little bit longer at cruiserweight, allow Bellew all the time he needs to come back down to the 200-pound division. And I'm going to dust this guy off as well before I move up to heavyweight. That's what Usyk is like. He's a thorough guy. He wants to make sure that there is no fighter out there at all who could possibly contest his position as being the #1 in whatever division. So given the fact that he's like that, yeah, it wouldn't at all surprise me if he was targeting the Dubois rematch to clear any issues up about that supposedly controversial low blow. It was clearly a low blow. It amazes me. The people who are contesting the idea that it's a low blow, either they haven't seen the punch from the right angle where you see it clearly land way below, not just the belt line, but the hip line, way below. Either they haven't seen that, or they don't know the rules of boxing, because there are some people running around acting like it's only a low blow if it literally hits you in the testicles. Okay, that's nonsense. You must be a super casual if you think that for something to be a low blow, it literally has to hit you in the testicles. No, it doesn't. It's anything but, it's if the majority of the glove lands below the hip line, it's a low blow. And the Dubois shot against Usyk clearly qualified as a low blow based upon that criteria. I've been over this in previous streams and videos, okay? So either it's somebody who hasn't seen the right angle of the shot where you can clearly see it land low, or it's somebody who doesn't understand the rules, or it's somebody who has some type of bias and therefore they're not seeing reason for that reason. All right, but yeah, because there's still some narrative out there that Dubois was hard done by, don't be surprised if Usyk does take that fight next to clear all that up once and for all. Do Daniel Dubois for a second time without any controversy, and then maybe one more fight and call it a day. I think it would be wise of him to do that, because at the age of 38, well, he's 38 on the 17th, so he's nearly 38. You can get old overnight. And he's in the land of the giants. Also, although Alexander Usyk has been tremendously motivated and disciplined his whole career, when you've climbed to the top of the mountain the way he has, eventually you're not going to be able to get up for fights, for every fight the same way when you've achieved all the things that he has. He's a human being at the end of the day, and as disciplined as he's been, there has to come a time when, even though I'm sure he enjoys the training, he enjoys pushing himself, the motivation is not going to be the same for every single fight. That time surely has to come. And when it does, you can end up losing to somebody who at your best you wouldn't have lost to, especially when you factor in the age, the size of the guys he's having to fight, and so on. If Usyk was 32 rather than 38, then I would definitely not be talking about, he should retire. No. I'd be saying this is going to be very interesting to see what kind of run he goes on. But at the age of 38, I think he should probably retire now, to be honest. But maximum 2 more fights. If he stays undefeated, he's got an incredible legacy, but also claim. And, you can make an argument for him being a top 10. Some people might even go as far as top 5 heavyweight of all time. I'm not saying I would necessarily put him in the top 5 myself, but I'm just saying that if he retires, having cleaned out 2 divisions and become undisputed and beaten the major names, then, and unbeaten, only the 2nd heavyweight champion in history to retire unbeaten, he's a unique champion at that stage. And so when people look back in future, they will put him in those top 5 conversations. Whether you think he deserves to be in them or not, people will do it if he retires unbeaten. You know what I mean? If he were to lose to somebody at this stage, I don't think as many people are going to put him in those conversations. So for his legacy, I think it's better for him to retire sooner rather than later. All right, so what else we got here? So Turkey, again, the Ring Magazine. Actually, was it at the Ring Magazine Awards? But he put this up on the Ring Magazine Instagram page regardless. But there's actually quotes from an interview here. I'm not sure where the interview was. I forgot when I took those screenshots. But anyway, Turkey Al-Sheikh says he wants to see 5 fights in 2025. Those are Canelo Alvarez versus Terence Crawford, Usyk Dubois 2, Fury Joshua, Ryan Garcia versus Devin Haney, Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn. And bear in mind, I'm sure most of you guys know this anyway, but Turkey Al-Sheikh owns Ring Magazine now. All right, so when it's quoting him saying this, then you could be sure that this is what he actually said. So Canelo versus Crawford, as somebody said in the chat at the start of this live stream, it's not a fight I'm particularly interested in either, truth be told, Canelo versus Crawford. But there is some interest in it, especially stateside. I think in the United States, a lot of boxing fans would really be interested in that fight. So, yeah, Terence Crawford, Canelo Alvarez is one of them. Alexander Usyk versus Daniel Dubois 2. Personally, I'm not particularly clamoring for that one either at this stage, but we'll see how Daniel Dubois gets on with Joseph Parker. For me, there's been too many rematches in the heavyweight division in this era. I would have liked to have seen, many different matchups happen, which didn't because of rematches. And rematches are part of the reason that Undisputed took so long to make. Because when Anthony Joshua lost to Ruiz and then when he lost to Usyk, there were rematches. Now, with the Ruiz situation, it was a voluntary defense. So even though I didn't like the fact that there was a rematch, I would rather have seen Ruiz go on and fight Wilder for Undisputed. because it was a voluntary defense, I could accept a rematch clause being in the contract. But with the Usyk thing, again, this really started with the Klitschko's. They started somehow getting rematch clauses into contracts, even for mandatory challengers. Same thing with AJ against Usyk. Usyk was his mandatory somehow. I mean, I guess we have to blame Usyk too, right? He agreed to have a rematch clause inserted into the contract when he was mandatory, which is not the norm, folks. And that delayed Undisputed happening because that rematch clause was there in the contract. So, yeah, too many rematches in the heavyweight division. I would rather see Alexander Usyk fight somebody else first, and then maybe if Daniel Dubois is still champion later on in 2025, early 2026, then do the Dubois rematch. But, doing it right now, I don't know whether it's necessarily warranted, but, maybe some people disagree and that's okay. They might say that, look, Dubois is coming off a devastating knockout win over AJ, and that really warrants him fighting Usyk again. The reason I take my particular stance is because I don't see that there was any controversy, personally, from the first Usyk-Dubois fight, because to me it was clearly a low blow. So there's no controversy there as far as I'm concerned, but in the minds of many other fans, for whatever reason, they think there's controversy, and so I could see why they would want to see a rematch, all right? Then there's Tyson Fury AJ. I've spoken about that earlier on in the stream. I'm kind of indifferent about it, but for bragging rights between the two sets of fans, I could see why people would want it. Ryan Garcia versus Devin Haney 2. I'm not sure whether even Turki Al-Sheikh can make that happen, to be honest, because of all the provisions that Ryan Garcia would want to be put in place. So, Ryan Garcia's, Devin Haney is suing Ryan Garcia, so I'm not sure how that's going to go. Shout out to Workstation for the super chat. He says, the fights Turki mentioned are great on paper, but all feel underwhelming with context at the same time. I agree with you. I absolutely 100% agree with you. They all do seem kind of underwhelming. Yeah, Canelo versus Crawford is like, Usyk versus Dubois, Fury versus AJ. Gonna sound strange. Out of all the fights on there, even though I'm not particularly bothered whether it happens or not, I think Fury versus AJ would probably be the one that interests me the most. Right? The others, even though some of them technically are better fights, right? Like Usyk versus Dubois, too. I don't know, they just don't interest me really. And Chris Eubank Jr. versus Conor Benn has never interested me from day one. Never been interested in that fight ever. Garcia Haney 2. I mean, for one, Haney is going to insist that Garcia undergoes the most stringent PED testing imaginable. And he's put himself into that program, by the way. Haney's getting tested all the time himself, so, he's not asking Garcia to do anything that he wouldn't do. But Garcia is such a wild card. The fact, for example, with the first fight, that he just completely disregarded the weight and came in several pounds over. He put Devin Haney in a situation where it's like, yeah, you could cancel the fight or, get a different opponent in, but then you're not going to make a fraction of the money that you would have got fighting Ryan Garcia. And never mind the greed of the fighter. If Devin Haney had decided to do that and not go through with the Ryan Garcia fight, I'm just telling you folks, he would have upset the television network. He would have upset the promoters. He would have upset a load of people that stood to make a massive amount of money from the Ryan Garcia fight going ahead. Now, you could also look at it and say, well, no, those people should be upset with Garcia because he's the one that missed weight. Well, they'd be upset with both fighters at the end of the day. Garcia, obviously, coming in overweight, he was still willing to go ahead with a fight. If Devin Haney had been the one to say, no, I'm pulling the plug A lot of people would have been very upset. So there's kind of pressure on a fighter in Devin Haney's position to still go through with it. Ultimately, it was his call, but I have to imagine there was some pressure. So going into a rematch with Ryan Garcia, he's not going to know whether Garcia is going to do that again. But I guess if they structure the contracts and whatever in the right way, then they can say, look, if Garcia comes in overweight, the fight's cancelled. But then if you do that, you'd have to hide it from the public, obviously, right? Because the public would be bitterly disappointed if Garcia comes in and misses weight again. You know, if everybody's bought tickets and pay-per-views and all that kind of stuff. Because if you make that public, then the fans, the public are going to be hesitant to buy tickets. They're going to be hesitant to get the pay-per-view, not knowing whether Ryan Garcia is going to miss weight again. So, I don't know. There's a lot of issues surrounding a rematch between Haney and Garcia that would need to be ironed out. And when you're dealing with someone who's as much of a wild card as Ryan Garcia, I'm not sure whether you can, but we'll see. If Turki Al-Sheikh throws enough money at it, you never know. But yeah, shout out to Workstation for the super chat. So moving on then. From Turkey's 5 fights that he's looking at. Canelo Alvarez and Turki Al-Sheikh have squashed their beef. Now, nothing surprises me in boxing anymore. After all the things I've seen, people who appeared to be mortal enemies eventually ended up as best friends. You know, well, best friends is probably a stretch, but you know, they've ended up on good terms. One of the most striking examples would be David Haye and Derek Chisora. They were at each other's necks during their rivalry. They came to blows at that press conference in Germany following Chisora's fight with Vitaly Klitschko. David Haye obviously punched Chisora in the face during that press conference, that famous brawl. Years later, David Haye would go on to be Derek Chisora's manager. I never saw that one coming, right? So boxing is what, I mean, you look at the rivalry between Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren. Eddie Hearn is now Frank Warren's little sidekick, whereas before they were mortal enemies and what have you. So boxing is one of them kind of sports where funny things do happen. So in context of all that, Canelo squashing his beef with Turki Al-Sheikh isn't really that surprising, right? What I will say, though, is that I don't think money alone would have been behind this reconciliation that we see here. I think that Turki would have had to maybe walk back some of the things he said to Canelo, because Canelo's a very prideful guy. He's made so much money. A check from the Saudis, I don't think personally would necessarily get him to play ball with them just because of the size of the check. I think they would need to say some kind words to reconcile, right? To make him feel comfortable in the situation, because the way that Turki Al-Sheikh moves is a bit dictatorial based upon some of the things he's said and done in the past. And Canelo is not going to be dictated to by anybody. As far as he's concerned, he's his own king. So, yeah, I suspect that there was something like that that's gone on there, as well as promise of very large checks and what have you. So, yeah, Turki Al-Sheikh and Canelo Alvarez squashing the beef. I have to imagine that this means they will now try to push forward with a Crawford fight. And apparently that's the only fight that Terence Crawford is interested in. He doesn't seem to be interested in anything else other than fighting Canelo Alvarez. Doesn't seem to be interested in boots. Doesn't seem to be interested in, you know, anybody else at 154 or 147. It's only the Canelo Alvarez fight that seems to interest him for whatever reason. So we will see if that happens. But as somebody mentioned earlier on in the chat, nobody's interested. Maybe the UK audiences are not as interested, but I have to imagine the American audiences will be very interested. King KO says, Turkey bent the knee to Canelo. I'm not sure about that, but, you know, he probably said some kind words to him and maybe walked back some of the stuff he said in the past. If you class that as bending the knee, then maybe you bent the knee. Beast LFC says, Hatman, do you think Canelo and Oscar would ever squash their beef? Now, that one right there would surprise me more than most. You know what I mean? Because the vitriol that has come out of Oscar De La Hoya and Canelo towards each other is crazy. But again, boxing is a funny old game, funny old sport, so never say never. But if I were to put money, you know, I wouldn't put any money on it. Let me just put it that way. I think it's less likely that they would squash their beef than most other beefs in boxing. Because it got legal as well. When Canelo left Golden Boy, he sued them successfully, I believe. Because he said that Golden Boy basically went behind his back and started, you know, putting things in contracts that he wasn't privy to with DAZN. Team Batman Boxing says, Canelo and Oscar will never squash that. Aiden Wood says, Bricktop, the atmosphere is dreadful. Carl Froch video title from 6 months ago. Yeah, even Carl Froch is bending the knee. Carl Froch has got Turkey on his channel. He's bending the knee. He's bowing down and kissing the ring. Carl Froch likes a pound note like everybody else, right? Jay Jones says, Hatman, remember when you said that Michael Hunter would unify heavyweight one day? I've never said that in my life. So I'll tell you this one time, don't ever lie about me. Don't ever claim that I said things that I never said. Because that's something that really gets my goat. I have never in my life said that Michael Hunter would unify the heavyweight division. Literally something I've never said in my life. Shout to Boxer Gangali, Brixton in the house. SW9, SW2. Long time, bro. What's good, what's good? Fee Khabib says, Turkey said that, said in that interview that he offered Calzaghe a Froch fight that he accepted. Then the next day changed his mind. For real? Who changed their mind, Froch or Calzaghe? Crack Alert says, do you think the Klitschko fight affected AJ's confidence? Yeah, maybe to some extent, because that was the first time he'd been down. That was the first time he'd ever looked in serious trouble. He was obviously wobbled briefly against Dillian Whyte, but it was a brief moment. For the rest of the bout, he was pretty much in control. He was competitive, but you always had the sense that AJ was in control. Whereas against Klitschko, AJ wasn't in control. And it happened in front of whatever it was, 80,000 people. I think AJ probably felt that he was exposed a bit that night. So that might have affected his confidence, long story short. Okay, Spartan says, Hatman, AJ has never had a girlfriend. I know he's got a son, but I hear it's surrogacy. Do you think he is rainbow? Random question. I've got no idea. Never had a girlfriend. Why do you say he's never had a girlfriend? Surrogacy. Why would he be paying for a child that's not his? And look, even if it is his child, there are plenty of people who, you know, they've got kids. They're married even, but they're living a double life. I mean, look at Michael Barrymore. Look at, I don't know, Kelly Maloney or whatever. But Michael Barrymore being an example, right? Some people live double lives. Is that the case with AJ? I don't know. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that it is, but who knows? I mean, look at Diddy. So, yeah, with these celebrities, man, you never know what they're up to behind closed doors. Shout out to Anthony for the super chat. He says, Hatman, how do you see Beterbiev Bivol 2 going? I have to imagine it's going to be similar to the first fight. Razor close again. And then a case of what do you like? I might edge slightly towards Beterbiev because I think he paced the fight slightly better. And he did start to get to Bivol later on. You know, the strength of him, the punching power and all that. But I don't know, with his age, because he'll really need to step it up, I think, Beterbiev, and do more. Because I know it's an extremely high level fight in terms of skills, and that kind of discouraged Beterbiev from throwing as many punches as he would normally throw. But I do think he's going to have to impose himself a bit earlier on in the fight. You know, throwing more shots, trying to do more, rather than getting into a chess match with Bivol, with, you know, as he did the first time. Because I think Bivol will make adjustments. So I lean ever so slightly towards Beterbiev, but the first fight was so razor close, it could have gone either way. I would not have complained had it been given to Bivol. So that's the way I see it. Shout out to Anthony for the super chat. Shout out to 1-1 for the super chat. Thank you very much, sir. Much appreciated. Big up 1-1 every time. A shout out to Muro's man for the super chat. He says, I'm not keen on the Crawford-Canelo fight. Bud is a great fighter, but I think Canelo will be too strong for him. Canelo would overpower Bud. I agree with you. Based upon what we saw in the Madrimov fight, I'd have to go Canelo all day long. Now, one thing I will say, though, is that Canelo does not have the foot speed or the footwork or that bounce that Madrimov has. And that's one of the things that gave Crawford so much trouble against Madrimov, is because he was fighting off this constant bounce, which Terence Crawford wasn't able to read. Canelo doesn't fight like that. He's not bouncing anywhere, right? He's a flat-footed guy. And so maybe he'll be easier for Crawford to read. But Canelo's got a great jab. He is a good counterpuncher. And yeah, maybe he's just going to be too big and strong for Crawford. I suspect he will be. He's a technical guy. It's not like Crawford's in there with somebody who's going to give him a bunch of countering opportunities because they're letting their hands go all over the place and getting sloppy. That's not Canelo. Canelo's a low volume guy, a cerebral guy, a technician. Even though he applies pressure, he's very, very technical. So, yeah, I suspect Canelo will come out on top in that fight. But, hey, if Terence Crawford manages to pull it off, that's the cherry on top of a very impressive career. Guryon says Crawford Canelo will be very close. Yeah, we'll see. We will see if that fight takes place. All right, and just a little fun one here. So this is a recent picture, as you can see, of Lennox Lewis and Alexander Usyk with WBC President Mauricio Suleiman. Now, I'm going to guess this is at the Ring Magazine Awards, but the reason I bring this picture up is because Alexander Usyk, if this even applies to him, might be the only guy who has successfully repelled the Lennox Lewis curse. And for those of you who don't know about the Lennox Lewis curse, Lennox Lewis was drafted in to help David Price prepare for his rematch with Tony Thompson. And obviously the rematch went disastrously wrong for David Price, just as the first fight did. Lennox Lewis also spent a little bit of time with Frazer Clarke ahead of his rematch with Fabio Wardley. And Lennox Lewis was, showing him a few bits and pieces, how to throw his jab a certain way and so on and so forth. And of course, the rematch went disastrously wrong for Frazer Clarke as well. And some people say it's because of the advice that Lennox Lewis gave him. Because Frazer Clarke normally fights with his hands high, with both gloves glued to his head, right? Whereas if you saw the video, I think it was on Sky, correct me if I'm wrong, on their YouTube channel, the video where Lewis was spending some time with Frazer Clarke, he was telling Clarke not to jab, with his left hand glued to his head like that, but instead move his arms around a bit to create some motion to then punch off that motion, because it makes it more difficult for your opponent to see the punch coming. This is what Lennox Lewis was saying. And so if you go and watch that Frazer Clarke Fabio Wardley rematch, you'll see Frazer Clarke moving his moving his hands around just like Lennox Lewis told him, but then he gets cracked with that initial big right hand from Fabio Wardley. And so some people are saying he took Lewis's advice and he paid for it. And that's the thing about being a coach. Just because certain things worked for you as a fighter, it doesn't mean they're going to work for everybody you train. Lennox Lewis was a much better athlete than Frazer Clarke, had much better reflexes. So again, the things that worked for him might actually be disastrous for Frazer Clarke. And that's the key to being a good trainer, is knowing what to teach a fighter based upon their ability. You can't teach every fighter the same way, because for some fighters, a particular thing might work, and for others, it will be disastrous if they do it. So it's knowing exactly what the fighter can and cannot do, and teaching them and developing a style for them accordingly. Not a one-size-fits-all approach. But anyway, this is where the idea of a Lennox Lewis jinx or curse came from. And of course, in the run-up to Usyk's rematch with Tyson Fury, Lennox Lewis visited Usyk in the gym. And so some people were thinking, oh my gosh, Usyk is going to be the latest victim of the Lennox Lewis curse. But one of the things that I said at the time when people were talking about this in my Element group, I said, well, Lewis isn't actually training Usyk. I wouldn't have thought anyway. I think he's just visiting the gym. Whereas the other guys, David Price and Frazer Clarke, even if it was only for an afternoon, he actually had some input in terms of what they were going to do in their next fight. I can't imagine Lennox Lewis could really teach Usyk anything, especially since Usyk is a southpaw and he's so accomplished. I don't know whether Lennox Lewis would even try to teach Usyk anything. It's not going to translate from an orthodox 6'5" fighter to a southpaw who fights in a completely different way. So whatever the case may be, if there is such a thing as a Lennox Lewis curse, like the Drake curse, it definitely didn't work on Alexander Usyk. Yeah, he was immune to it if it's a thing. Linkage said Lewis did some training with Wilder too. Yeah, I saw that, where he's teaching Wilder how to throw a proper jab. The Joker says, how do you think AJ Bacoli goes if the fight actually happens this year? I think Bacoli knocks him out. I think Bacoli knocks him out. I reckon Bacoli would knock him out in similar fashion to Dubois. Shout out to someone for the super chat. He says, who did David Haye pick for the Usyk Fury rematch? I'm glad you mentioned that because I think it was actually Usyk. So there's the David Haye curse as well. Maybe Usyk is immune to that one too. So yeah, Usyk is shielded from all these curses. Somebody asking me, did I see the Ring Magazine awards? I've not yet seen the whole thing yet. I'm gonna go do that. Shout out to Spartans. He says, my laugh makes him laugh. A lot of people say that. Ward Jones says, how would you describe Bacoli's style? And I guess you meant to say, did Bacoli have an amateur career? I don't know much about Bacoli's amateur career, to be honest. I'm sure he had one, but I don't know much about it. His older brother, Ilunga Makabu, Bacoli used to spar him growing up. And I'm sure Ilunga Makabu had an amateur career. So I don't know much about Bacoli's amateur career, to be honest, but I'm sure he did have one. And how would I describe his style? How would I describe his style? I'd say he's a swarmer. He swarms all over you. He's kind of like a superior version of Jarrell Miller. It's a similar kind of approach. You know, he comes forward at you and throws a load of punches, doesn't leave you alone, imposes his size on you, leans on you. So I would say, yeah, he's like a better version of Jarrell Miller because he's a bit faster than Miller. I mean, they're a similar size, right? Miller is a bit heavier. Well, no, maybe a lot heavier, but Martin Bacoli is still very big. What is he, 280? And Jarrell Miller, at best, will be, these days, 300 pounds. So he's probably like a good 20 pounds heavier than Bacoli. And by the way, Jarrell Miller was in the Fury camp. It might have been a year or two ago. And he did an interview, or it might have been a post he put out on social media, but I remember it where he said he got his butt kicked in the gym today. Now, I assumed at the time, wrongly, that Tyson Fury was the one who kicked Jarrell Miller's butt. But it turns out it was actually Martin Bacoli. That's who Jarrell Miller was referring to when he said he got his butt kicked in the gym. Martin Bacoli kicked his butt in the gym. So again, when I say that Bacoli is like a superior version of Miller, that might be an example of it right there. And Billy Nelson, of course, with his million sparring stories for Martin Bacoli, also alluded to the sparring session that Bacoli had with Miller and said that Bacoli basically battered Miller in the gym. Afro Jam says Bacoli claimed the only guy who stood up to him in sparring was AJ. Yeah, I heard that he and AJ had real good spars, and yeah, Billy Nelson talked about that as well. But that's with 18-ounce gloves on or 20-ounce gloves on and headgear. In that scenario, maybe AJ can, or at least back then could, stand with Bacoli and have it out. But with the little 10-ounce gloves and no headgear, I see Bacoli knocking him out. Jackie Boy Johnson says, isn't Bacoli getting overrated? He beat hype job Anderson, who struggled against the 40-year-old Charles Martin. No, I don't think the Bacoli is getting overrated, because what do you mean by overrated? Nobody is saying that Bacoli is going to be undisputed champion of the world and, reign for years. That would be overrating him. All I'm saying is that Bacoli would beat Anthony Joshua now. Anthony Joshua just got wiped out by Daniel Dubois. Why would it be construed as seeing Bacoli as overrated if I think he could beat this current version of AJ? So I don't see this thing about Bacoli's overrated. And as far as Jared Anderson being a hype job, I don't like to use the word hype job or the term hype job, because it gets into this kind of dichotomous black and white thinking that a lot of boxing fans have, whereby you're either the real deal or you're a hype job and there's nothing in between. You know what I mean? I don't look at things that way. I think boxing is a lot more nuanced than that. I don't see Jared Anderson as a hype job at all. Not at all. He came up against the style he couldn't deal with. He got beat. But I still think that he has ability. And if he listens and makes the correct adjustments, I think he's still young enough to be a factor in the heavyweight division. So I don't get into this black and white dichotomous mindset that a lot of boxing fans have, where, oh, he's a hype job and he's real, and no, there's a lot there's a lot more than just hype job or real deal. There's shades of gray in between. The Joker says Bacoli hits a lot harder than Miller as well. I agree. Much harder. Kyle says F.A. Jagba is going to rock Martin Bacoli. Mark my words. It's possible. I mean, Jagba will be, as far as I'm concerned, in a professional ring, the hardest puncher that Martin Bacoli has fought as a pro, without a shadow of a doubt. Jimbo Jones says Bacoli is being overrated. Many act like he's unbeatable. I've never said, well, these are people that I've never come across. I've never come across anyone other than Billy Nelson who's acting like Bacoli's unbeatable. Spartan says, if Bacoli is so good, how come Michael Hunter knocked him out? Unfortunately, didn't watch that fight. Again, I don't know where you're getting this thing that he's so good. And no, he's a good fighter. Just like I said a few moments ago, there aren't just two types of fighters. There aren't just two categories that you put a fighter in, the real deal or a hype job. No, there are many shades of gray in between. Many shades of gray. And as Dwyer always says, boxing is chess, it's not checkers. Styles make fights. Bacoli has a particular style and a particular set of abilities that make him dangerous, particularly against certain fighters. I'm not saying he's going to be the king of the division and reign for years and he's so good and he's amazing, he's a Hall of Famer. I'm saying none of that. I'm just saying he's going to be dangerous for certain people because of his style, because of his set of abilities. I don't know why people have got an issue with that. I'm kind of surprised. Shout out to Workstation for the super chat. He says, I like Bacoli, but I don't trust his trainer, Captain Nose Hair. Yeah, Billy Nelson's nose hair is a bit out of control. Jackie Boy Johnson says, I wouldn't be surprised if AJ stopped Bacoli either. Oh, anything can happen in heavyweight boxing, but my money would be on Bacoli. I think that Bacoli's got a much better chin than AJ. I think he's much more confident. I think he's fresher. AJ looks so spaced out. You know, even at the Ring Awards, he looks spaced out in the interview with Ade. I don't know what is wrong with that guy, why he's all spaced out like that. And as far as Billy Nelson, well, one thing I'll say about Billy Nelson is that during the Michael Hunter fight, which is on YouTube, so I'm not sure why the person who talked about didn't see that fight made that comment, because you can watch the Martin Bakole Michael Hunter fight on YouTube last I checked. And during the fight, Martin Bakole wanted to quit. I've spoken about this many times. Martin Bakole wanted to quit during the fight, and Billy Nelson literally forced him to carry on in the corner. And to me, that was a very bad sign. If you've got a fighter who wants to quit, you don't know what the fighter's feeling. You know, you don't know if they're starting to have issues neurologically. So to force a fighter to continue when they want to quit is a terrible thing to do. And that's basically what Billy Nelson did in the Michael Hunter fight. Bakole wanted to quit and Billy was like, no, Martin, you can't. Yeah, that wasn't a good look at all. Shout out to President Brush for the super chat. He says, any chance for White, or is he finished? He's finished. I'm not sure if you saw the Tete fight, but Dylan White looked terrible against Tete. Yeah, he got the win, but Tete, as far as I'm concerned, is nowhere close to his stated age. I think Tete is listed at something like, what, 30, 32, 33, 35 tops? Nah, Tete is close to 50 years old. I'm telling you, that guy's close to 50. And Dylan White couldn't even put him down. That's a guy who was knocked out in one round by Daniel Dubois a couple years back. Dylan White couldn't put a dent in him. He hit him with loads of clean shots. Nothing happened. So, and Dylan White looked slow as molasses in that fight. I think Dylan White is done. I don't know whether White will even get an opportunity to be in another big fight. He might have been frozen out. Because, you know, Dylan is a very fiery character, very alpha, and he takes that energy to the negotiating table. Now, coming from the small hall circuit, getting that opportunity against Anthony Joshua, he needed that fiery mentality to make a name for himself, to carve a niche for himself in the heavyweight division, which he did successfully. But at some stage, particularly at the back end of your career, when nobody really needs you to sell pay-per-views and whatnot, because Dylan White was one of the best ticket sellers and pay-per-view sellers for Matchroom for a while. That's no longer the case. So these promoters don't need to, and I'm gonna talk from what I think would be their perspective, they don't need to tolerate Dylan White's aggressive attitude at the negotiating table anymore. Because he's not selling tickets, he's not selling pay-per-views like that these days. He isn't one of the leading contenders in the heavyweight division anymore. So, you know, I don't think, unless Dylan White wants to bend the knee in front of Frank Warren or Eddie Hearn, I don't see any of them giving him an opportunity, to be honest. The Joker says White keeps glazing turkey in interviews. He really wants that Saudi money. Yeah, and that's probably why. That's probably why. Because he knows the promoters, Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, ain't going to give him a look in. Yeah, exactly that, President Brush. The stuff that Dylan White did in the run-up to the Fury fight, that definitely ain't going to go down well with Frank Warren. Frank Warren's the kind of guy to hold a grudge. And the fact that Dylan White refused to play ball, yeah, that's going to be an issue. Shout out to Grizz for the super chat. He says, psychologically, does a good nickname offset a bad actual name? Like Luke, instant death partridge. Instant death. I can't say that that's a good nickname. I think that's just a bad actual name and a bad nickname combined. Luke, instant death partridge. But psychologically, the concept, will a good nickname offset a bad actual name? Only if people refer to you as the nickname and they never call you by your actual name. So for example, not that this guy's got a bad actual name, it's a perfectly fine name. Saul Alvarez. Nobody calls him Saul Alvarez. Everybody calls him Canelo. Sometimes they'll call him Canelo Alvarez, but most of the time they'll just call him Canelo. If you had a terrible name, but a really good catchy nickname, and people only called you the catchy nickname, then psychologically, yeah, it might be able to offset having a terrible actual name. Waved says, Hatman, do you know Napa Eubank's manager? Yeah, he was on POW. He was a rapper, right? He was on POW with Lethal B back in the days. Now he's managing Eubank. It's a strange world. 24 said he used to chill with Getz. Well, he clashed Getz. It was kind of a friendly clash, but they did clash. I swear it was like Lord of the Mics or something. Jay Jones says, Hatman, did you hear about that story while Canelo was fighting Billy Joe Saunders? His bro was kidnapped. Yeah, I remember that at the time. It was during, I think, the week or two leading up to the fight. Yeah, I remember that. Shout out to the overtrained. Big up, big up. He says, Anderson has an approach that tends to lend itself to aging well if he applies himself and has the psychological prerequisites. Yeah, he just needs to listen to Sugar Hill, because Anderson has got this know-it-all mentality, and most fighters who have that kind of mentality find out the hard way, as he did against Piccoli. So he needs to understand that he doesn't know it all and accept the fact that these trainers like Sugar Hill are the people that you need to listen to get to the next level and get the most out of your talent. Now, Ward Jones says Anderson got potential. He's got his cardio and volume alone will beat most fighters, but he got messed up by Piccoli, took the fight out of him. Yeah, that's something that always impressed me about Anderson is the cardio. His cardio is crazy. So it all depends on how much ambition Anderson has. All this talk about retiring at 27, if he's still on that kind of time, if he's still in that kind of mind frame, then he can forget about it. But if, let's say, the birth of his child, because I think he's a father now, has inspired him to do more in boxing, then I think there could be a future for him. Obviously, he has to accept the fact that he doesn't have the kind of punch resistance that would allow him to fight the way he did against Bakole. He's going to have to be a lot more defensively responsible moving forward. And his defense has always been an issue. We all saw it against Charles Martin. We saw it even before the Charles Martin fight, that he was reckless defensively. He was doing this lean back and getting caught. So he's going to need to go back to the drawing board and sort out his defensive issues. If the desire is there, then he's definitely got enough time. He's only like 25, 26. Or 24, is he? 24, 25. Jay Jones says, as soon as you see a heavyweight with crazy cardio, you know they're on peds. I wouldn't make that assumption myself. Depends on the heavyweight. It depends on their age. Jared Anderson's very young. And he's athletic. So a young athletic guy, they can have good cardio. Workstation says Jarrell Miller is the best the best American heavyweight at the moment. Deontay is finished. Anderson is on the rebuild or may retire, and Torres is still on the come up. I couldn't argue with you, Workstation. I couldn't argue with you if you said that Miller right now is the best American heavyweight. Couldn't argue with you. Hassan says, Hatman, thoughts on upcoming bout between Vidal Riley and Isaac Chamberlain? Yeah, I spoke about this in yesterday's live stream. So just to reiterate, I see Vidal Riley winning all day long on points. I think Riley's too fresh, too mobile, too versatile, and he'll beat Isaac Chamberlain comfortably on points. Black Dynamite says, why can't Simon Jordan say Moses Itauma's last name right? He keeps calling him Ituma. And Spencer Oliver keeps calling him Atoma. So there's a Tuma, Atoma, but nobody's saying Itauma. God knows what that's all about. Shout to Martin Wood Wilkinson. Has got to go to work, Hatman. Thanks for the live and thanks for tuning in. Ayed says, Hatman, did you talk about Boxer sending legal letter to Liam Cameron? No, I didn't even know about that. A legal letter. I've heard that Boxer have sent a improved offer to Liam Cameron because Queensbury put out a statement saying that they countered Boxer's initial offer but haven't heard back. But since then, I've heard that Boxer have countered with an improved offer. So we'll see where that goes. But in terms of the legal letter, what's all that about? Has Cameron said something defamatory? Black Dynamite says, I think Andy Ruiz still got some good fights left. His hand was terribly jacked up in that Miller fight. Terribly jacked up. And Ruiz is a slob, right? He's a guy that does not live the life whatsoever. So inactivity is going to hurt Andy Ruiz even more than most fighters because of the fact he's such a slob. Jay Jones says, Hatman, would you like to see Johnny Fisher's dad punch up Gareth A. Davis? No. Even though I'm not a fan of Gareth A. Davis, I'm even less of a fan of Johnny Fisher's dad. So no. Okay, XMB says Jermaine Franklin could be the best American heavyweight. That's an interesting take. That's an interesting take. 1-1 says, yeah, Anderson is not the biggest. If you see a big muscle-bound guy with crazy cardio, he's eating wild boar sandwiches with fury. But Anderson is just young and athletic. Yeah, Anderson, I think for his last fight against Bacoli, he was a bit bigger, but he was kind of in the low 240s for a while. You're 22, 23, you've been boxing since you were a kid. You're in the low 240s, you're athletic. You can have a high work rate. You know, it's not like Miller, who was 320 pounds and he was throwing like, you know, over 100 punches around. That's abnormal for a guy that size to be able to throw that many shots. But with Jared Anderson, you know, 240, athletic, 6'4", 22, 23 years old at the time. I'm not saying that he's definitely not on PEDs, but I'm just saying, to me, it's not a big red flag when I see a young athletic guy have a high work rate. That wouldn't be enough to make me suspicious. User guest says, Isaac wins that, I feel, Hatman. All right, fair enough. Personally, I think Vidal Riley will win that fight comfortably. I mean, just look at Isaac Chamberlain's last fight, right? He fought on the undercard of Chris Smith versus Richard Biakpour and got beat. So I think Vidal Riley is more talented than Isaac Chamberlain, and it will show itself in the fight. Shout out to Frankie for the super chat. He says, Hatman, do you think, looking back, Vlad made a tactical mistake not jumping on AJ when he floored him? Looking back now, it really seems he let him off. Yeah, he definitely made a tactical mistake, for sure. But that was Vladimir Klitschko. During Vladimir Klitschko's 10-year unbeaten run, he did similar things to many fighters, where he would drop them early, but he wouldn't go in for the finish. He would break them down gradually over a number of rounds. So Vlad was always a very, very cautious fighter, and that's one of the things that turned people off about him. That you would literally have to be completely finished, you know, knackered beyond knackered, right? Tired beyond tired, and concussed. And it have to be like the 11th or 12th, you know, well, let's say the 10th round or something, and only then would Vlad actually try and finish you off. Do you know what I mean? He would have to disarm you to a ridiculous extent before he'd let his hands go. I'm talking about the Vlad of the 10-year unbeaten run. Because earlier on in his career, he did let his hands go and he paid for it. So, yeah, it was a mistake on Vlad's part, but that's just the way Vlad boxed, you know? That's just the way he boxed. And apparently Vitali advised him in the corner not to try and finish AJ off, just to keep out boxing him and breaking him down, and then you'll get him later. That was Vlad's thing. Yep. Indeed, Black Dynamite says, I remember Manny Stewart shouting at him like crazy for not finishing opponents off. An example would be the Eddie Chambers fight. Manny Stewart was furious with Vladimir Klitschko in the Eddie Chambers fight. He was screaming at him in the corner. And at one stage, I'm not sure if it was that fight or a different one, but I remember at one stage, Vlad actually told Manny to chill out because Manny was so angry with him. And he eventually, in the 12th round, actually went after Eddie Chambers and knocked him out cold with a left hook. But yeah, that's what Vlad was like. He just... Even if he dropped you earlier on in a fight, he normally wouldn't go for the finish. Unless it was so clear that, you know, you had absolutely nothing left, then he wouldn't go for it. And obviously against AJ, he was dropped himself in the previous round. So he would have been presumably kind of cautious because of the fact he was dropped. Ayed says, Hatman, did you talk about Boxer sending a legal letter to Liam Cameron? No, somebody mentioned it a few moments ago. But unless I've missed their comment, they didn't really expand. Tell me about this legal letter, because I know nothing about it. Why have they sent him a legal letter? Please explain. Ayed says for his social media posts, apparently. Okay, anything specific that Cameron said that they're not happy about? And they sent one to Frank Warren as well. All right, giving Frank Warren a taste of his own medicine, huh? Shout out to Fight Sport Talk. He says Emmanuel Stewart said he liked Hay taunting Vlad because he knew it would make him fight. Yeah, I remember that. One says, which fighter disappointed you the most in your years watching boxing in terms of high expectations and poor individual performance or a disappointing career? That's a good question. I want to say Gary Russell Jr. would be one of them because he was a very good amateur, and when he turned pro, he looked spectacular in some of his early performances. But as his career panned out, it became very, very disappointing. You know, especially after the loss to Lomachenko. He just faded off into obscurity. He was fighting like once a year or once every 2 years. And nowadays, nobody talks about him. And, you know, so, yeah, Gary Russell Jr., he always had hand trouble, to be fair, Gary Russell Jr. But, yeah, based upon his amateur background and his clear talent, he had a very disappointing career. Fight Sport Talk says Odlanier Solis. Yeah, he couldn't stay away from the fridge. But, you know, there have been many fighters over the years who had a lot of potential. Who is that Dominican guy? Was it Guzman? Was his name Guzman? He was like 140 pounder. The lightweight, I think it was a 140 pounder. He was very talented, but he was another guy who had no discipline. And therefore his career was a disappointment. I think his name was Guzman. He was very talented, that guy. Some people are saying Tony Yoka, Audie Harrison. Well, these are not guys that I had especially high hopes for. So it wouldn't really qualify from my perspective, for me personally. But there are other fighters that I did have high hopes for, like Gary Russell Jr. As Stockholm says, Hatman, I think Beterbiev is one of the most underrated fighters in decades. He's knocking out sparring partners constantly and deserves more recognition. Do you agree? Is he underrated? I don't think he's necessarily underrated. I just think he doesn't have much of a profile. I think he's just not that well known outside of hardcore boxing circles. But the people who do know him, I think, rate him appropriately, most of them. So I wouldn't personally say he was underrated. Because underrated to me is when, of the people who actually know you, a large percentage of them don't give you the credit that you deserve based upon your achievements. With Beterbiev, again, I think the people who know him give him the credit he deserves, most of them. But a lot of people just don't know who he is. He doesn't have a particularly big following. XMB says, Juan Guzman, that's the guy. Yes, Juan Guzman, very talented Dominican fighter. The Celtic Magician says, Corey Sanders was disappointing. Yeah, maybe, but again, I didn't really know how good Sanders was when I first started watching him on the come up. He was an interesting fighter, but I didn't necessarily think he was going to take over the heavyweight division or anything. So, I mean, you could say his career was disappointing in the sense that he maybe didn't make the most of his talent. But I kind of say that looking back in retrospect rather than at the time. Because at the time, again, early on in Sanders' career, I wasn't necessarily looking at him as somebody that I thought was going to take over the division. Hassan says, yeah, I agree. Vidal has more to his game, I think. Yeah, I think he'll beat Isaac Chamberlain comfortably. I don't think Chamberlain really can do much with him, to be honest. Other than a little bit of, slick defense that Chamberlain does have. And maybe Chamberlain's got a better chin, because Chamberlain's got a pretty good chin. Riley's chin, we haven't yet seen that tested properly. But other than that, I think Riley is better in every way. I think he's faster. I think he hits harder. I think he's got better footwork. He's more mobile. He's younger, right? He's fresher. He's more versatile. He's got, in my opinion, better punch technique. So I see Vidal Riley winning that one all day long. Cosmic Jack says, just catching up. Fury doesn't handle physically strong, big set with long arms fighters who can punch with and got good counters or willing to punch between. AJ, for the first time, has nothing to lose. You make a good point. But again, it all comes down to confidence for me. Does AJ have the confidence to execute? But then again, you say that AJ's got nothing to lose. Sometimes that can make a fighter perform better. I always felt about Audley Harrison, since some people were mentioning Audley Harrison, that psychologically he could never cope with the amount of pressure that he put on himself, because he talked himself up to high heaven as the next, the best thing since sliced bread. That's what Audley Harrison did. And therefore, when you talk yourself up in that way, it comes with expectations from the public. And the weight of those expectations, I always felt, caused Audley Harrison to freeze when he got in the ring. See, he was somebody that liked to listen to these self-help gurus, people like Les Brown in particular. And I'm not saying Les Brown teaches this necessarily. I'm not into that kind of stuff, but some of them might say you need to put pressure on yourself to get the best out of yourself. Well, yes, some fighters, the way they're wired psychologically, that works. But for other fighters, you actually need to take the pressure off them. Because if you put pressure on them, they'll crumble. So you need to find ways as a trainer, as a team, to alleviate the pressure that they're feeling. Yeah? Every fighter is not the same. With Anthony Joshua, he hasn't handled the pressure. And there's been a lot of pressure on him. Maybe more pressure on him than any other heavyweight, right? But he's not somebody that relishes pressure the way that some other fighters do. You know, you look at a guy like, trying to think of an example. I mean, Tyson Fury would be an example of somebody who appears to relish pressure. Even David Haye. David Haye was a guy that used to relish pressure. Anthony Joshua's not like that. Since he's been knocked out, again, but this time in the most conclusive fashion yet, and most people, including myself, are writing him off now and saying he's completely finished. Is it possible that that will lift enough pressure off his shoulders, and because there's such low expectations of him now, that it will bring out a great performance from him against Tyson Fury? Maybe. I personally don't think so, but I understand what you're saying, and I understand the concept, right? The psychological concept that's going on there. So it's a good comment. Shout out to Cosmic Jack. Dr. Wu says, Hatman, do you remember Pele Reed? Yes, I do. Fought out of the Ingle gym. Came from a kickboxing background. He was from Birmingham or somewhere in the West Midlands. I think it was Birmingham. Uh, 24 said, Hatman, in a street fight or bar fight, MMA guy versus boxer, who wins? Well, if it's a one-on-one in a, clean, empty space, then I would say in most cases the MMA guy would win. But obviously it depends on the talent and the size of the fighters, and, there's a lot of variables, right? If it was like a 130-pound MMA fighter against a 200-pound boxer, the 200-pound boxer might just be too physically strong for him. Even if the MMA fighter tried to come in and take him down, he might just be too physically big and strong. And in a street fight, there's no rules. So if an MMA guy tries to get you in a certain hold, you can gouge his eye, bite his ear. There's no rules. But generally, I would say in a one-on-one where there's nobody else involved, MMA would serve you better in a street fight. But as many people have pointed out, street fights are chaotic and they're unpredictable, and there might be other people around. So the last thing you want to be doing is taking somebody to the ground, because if they've got friends around or whatever, they can come and kick you in the head. In a chaotic situation like in a club, I worked in clubs for years as a bouncer, you're trying to get the situation over as quickly as possible. You definitely don't want to be wrestling around in the ground with people or any of that. You're trying to go in there and get it done quick, because the longer it drags out for, the more dangerous it becomes. I would always advise, and I need to take my own advice, obviously, and I've been doing it for the most part for a long time now. I'd always advise to avoid getting into street fights. It's just too dangerous. Not just too dangerous for you, but dangerous for the other person. Because, You know, throughout my lifetime, I've seen many occasions where someone has hit somebody in a street fight. The person has fallen, cracked their head on the pavement and died. You don't want to be in that position. You don't want to get into a street fight, hit somebody, and now you're up on a manslaughter charge. So avoid getting into them situations if you can. That's what happened to Clifton Mitchell's son, who's also Tyson Fury's friend and sparring partner, Ty Mitchell. He hit somebody in a street fight and they died. He did time in prison for manslaughter. It's not the one. You know, especially if you have any kind of combat sports background, that just increases the likelihood of you seriously injuring somebody and going to prison. So it should be a last resort. Throwing a hand should be a last resort where somebody's coming at you and you've got no other choice but to defend yourself. Outside of that, you know, do what you can to avoid them situations. One once said, I've had 50 plus street fights, never wanted to, but people always see calmness and reasoning as you being scared to fight. They learned the hard way. Yeah, well, it sounds like you dealt with those situations the way you had to deal with them, right? If somebody's coming at you, they leave you no choice. Hassan says, Hatman, I remember you talking about bare instances of crazy scuffles you've been in while you were a bouncer. Yeah. In my Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series, I talk about a lot of the fights that I was involved in when I was a bouncer. Fee Khabib says, no way 50 men have started a fight with you because you're calm. So, all right, so they're saying that 1-1 must have started some of those fights. It depends on the environment you're in, right? If you're around a lot of idiots, if you're in an environment where there's a lot of idiots, then over a number of years or decades, maybe. Waved says, do you miss being a bouncer? Hell no. Hell no. Why would I miss being a bouncer? Definitely not. Who the hell wants to be standing out in the cold or even in a club with a bunch of drunk people and high people? And hell no. I don't miss that. Entertainment? Nah, man. I don't need that kind of entertainment. That's long, man. That job made me too stressed out. It made me too violent. Constantly having people trying to test you and all that. Threatening you. You know, when someone threatens me, because people do that all the time. Like you kick them out of the club and then they start threatening you. They're going to come back with a knife or a gun or their friends or this, that, and the other. That used to get to me when people would threaten me, you know. Used to really get to me. I would take that so personally when someone threatens me. It just stressed me out and made me really violent. Like, even away from the job, when I'm on the street walking about, I would snap on people so quick. And I didn't even realize that it was the stress from the job. having to fight people all the time, having people threatening me and all that kind of stuff. I was like a coiled spring. And that's when I knew I had to get out of that job, especially after that incident where I mashed somebody up. A big fight kicked off in this particular club. And I hit this guy, I mashed him up, dragged him out unconscious. And his girlfriend had a relative in the local police who was like high up. Anyway, the police got involved in the situation. And I was like, okay, I need to leave this job alone. Because either I'm going to get badly hurt or worse, or I'm going to end up going to prison for something here. So with that incident there, I was like, nah, no more. And luckily, this was still during the cash in hand days. This was during the days where the head bouncer didn't even know my surname, like that. So, yeah. In fact, no, he must have known my surname because I had a SIA badge at the time. I think. Yeah, I did. I had a SIA badge at the time. Maybe he just looked at my badge when I first started working there and didn't take, I don't know what it was. But anyway, the head bouncer actually turned against me, right? And he started like messaging me, telling me that I need to come in and chat to the local police about the incident that happened. Because it was a big brawl. It wasn't just me that hit somebody. Loads of people hit people. But the guy who I knocked out, his girlfriend had some relative in the police or whatever, high level guy in the police. And at first, the head bouncer was like, oh, don't worry about it. We don't give the police no names, blah, 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 blah. But because this particular policeman was of such a level, all of a sudden the head bouncer changed his tune. And he started texting my phone and calling my phone and saying, no, actually, you need to come in and give an interview to the police. And I was like, hell no, I'm gone. I'm out of here. You ain't finding me. Jay Jones says, a lot of bouncers look forward to the fighting. Yeah, some of them do. A lot of them are just steroid heads. Yeah? And when these guys are pumping that much damn steroids, they become stupid. Yeah? They become stupid when they're pumping all them damn roids. I just wanted to make my money and go home safe and sound. I never wanted any trouble, which is why I used to have such a bad temper. Because if I'm just minding my own business, right, trying to do my job, make my money and go home, and somebody wants to be a tough guy, oh my gosh, I'm going to switch on you so bad. Because I'm not out here trying to be a tough guy. I'm just out here trying to make money, man. Right? So if you're coming with some disrespect and you're puffing your chest out, trying to be some bad boy, yeah, I'm the wrong one to do that with, mate. I'm telling you. Yeah, so I gained a reputation when I was a bouncer of being somebody that would switch quick. I would go from 0 to 100 real fast. Not because I wanted to fight or anything like that, but because I was stressed out. I was so stressed out doing that job with idiots and drunk people and high people and threats and oh no. And all the fighting, it just put me in war mode all the time, like 24/7. And I didn't like it. Feed Khabib says, did you ever encounter any gypsies? Yes. I worked up in Manchester for a bit as a bouncer and encountered quite a few gypsies up there. And they were banned from most places that I worked. That's one of the first things the manager would tell you, that, yeah, you don't let... Many of the managers would tell us, no gypsies and no squaddies. Squaddies being army. No gypsies and no squaddies. And also with the dress code, you know, people wearing particular types of shoes or clothes, you don't let them in either. But in terms of specifically types of people, the managers, especially in Manchester, would always say, No squaddies, no gypsies. Afro Jump says, what was it like working with useless, scared bouncers? Thankfully, I didn't have to work with too many of them. There were some. There was one who I spoke about in my Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series, who I didn't nickname him this, but some of the other guys nicknamed him the Chameleon, because whenever trouble would kick off, he would like blend into the background. So they called him the Chameleon. Whenever it kicked off, he was nowhere to be seen. But yeah, I never worked with too many people like that, to be fair. Shout out to Orca for the super chat. He says, do you still remember the little Irish guy? Little Irish guy? Or do you mean the little Scouse guy? I did work with one Irish guy that I can think of when I was a bouncer, but you're probably thinking of the little Scouse guy. Oh, that guy. Okay. I see what you're talking about. I thought you meant somebody I was working with. Yeah, the guy with a knife. Oh, yeah. Remember him with a machete. Yeah, that was nobody I was working with, though. That was like a punter. That was a punter. There was a guy who worked at the place where I was working at who was attacked by this Irish guy with a machete. Shout out to Charles B. Big up, big up, big up. Ramos says, serious question. If you were boxing when you were a bouncer and beating up guys in sparring, why did you care what these clowns said while they were drunk? If somebody's being aggressive towards me and disrespectful, then that's just the way I react. That's the way I'm wired. You know what I mean? I react to disrespect and aggression with aggression. It's not like a logical thing. It's an instinctive thing. And you know, when you're working as a bouncer, it especially back then in the early 2000s, it's a dangerous and it's a chaotic environment. When somebody's threatening you, you can't just dismiss it as somebody talking rubbish, because some of these people will follow through on their threats. So you've always got this thought in the back of your head, maybe this is the one who's actually going to come back and do something. Who's going to, you know, scout the place out and wait for me when I've finished. Several of people I've worked with were ambushed after they finished their shift, including one of the bosses I worked with, he was ambushed and somebody tried to stab him in the car park, who he had ejected from a club. So you were dealing with not just people talking rubbish, but the very real threat of violence. Do you understand? And so when you're under that constant threat, again, the way I reacted to it is it made me more violent. It just puts you into this war mode 24/7. So you can't just dismiss and, oh, they're just talking rubbish, they're not going to do anything. No, some people will do stuff. And on top of that, you're getting into fights most weeks. When I was working like 5 days a week, including the 2 days on the weekend, most weeks I'm getting into fights in these clubs. Do you know what I mean? And these are fights. These are not like, in America they call it a fair one. Yeah, we're just gonna have a little one-on-one fight with Queensberry rule. Nah, in a fight anything goes. People are trying to headbutt you, bite you, gouge your eyes, kick you in the balls, everything. You get several people trying to fight you at once. It's chaotic. So again, it's not just a matter of staying calm because because everyone's just talking rubbish and nobody's going to do anything. No, you're in the midst of violence every week. So that's why I would react in the way that I did, because I always felt threatened. When I feel threatened, I'm going to transfer that onto you. If you're threatening me, well, I'm going to make you feel threatened. Feed Khabib says, do you regret anything you ever did, went too far? No, I don't. I did what I had to do to keep myself safe. And checkmate, suck your mum. How about that? Checkmate's an idiot. Checkmate wouldn't have the heart to do the things I did. Stockholm says, Hatman, I've been sparring with pro boxers and training for years. How different is it being punched by a good boxer versus being stabbed? Is it a huge difference? I've never been stabbed, so I couldn't tell you. I've never been stabbed, thankfully. Workstation says, serious question for your amateur career. Did you find the negative thoughts affected you when competing positively or negatively? Do you mean from the work? From the work as a bouncer? Is that what you mean? By negative thoughts? Indeed, Orca. Shout out to Orca for that comment. This isn't customer service. This is an active wars. Exactly that. It's not like people talking rubbish online. When you're working as a bouncer, you're outside. People know where to find you. You don't know where to find them. You don't know where they live, but they know where to find you every night. Do you know what I mean? And you're dealing with fights, threats, yeah. I found it a stressful situation. Shout out to James Wood, fetched up the hard way. Big up James Wood every time. The Alexander Usyk of kitchen fitters. James Wood said, it wasn't me on the stream the other day when you thought it might be. What was his name? His name was, actually, what was his name? His name, I think, was, what was his name? Was it you using way too many napkins? It was something to do with that Eminem freestyle thing. I think it was like using way too many napkins or something like that. 1-1 says, I don't understand people enjoying street fighting and loving starting trouble. You should always be scared. It's stupid not to be. I've seen it go left for people so many times in every way imaginable. I completely 100% agree. But then again, you know, some people are crazy and they like all the trouble. They like all the drama. There are psychopaths out there who are addicted to violence. They love all the adrenaline and the danger they're in and all that type of stuff. I was never like that. I never wanted trouble or whatever. I just wanted to do my shift and go home when I was a bouncer, you know? Now, when I was a kid, as a teenager, yeah, I started some trouble and did some foolish things out of immaturity. You know, when you're a young kid, I was big for my age and I was strong and, you know, I did boxing and I could fight a bit. And when you're young and stupid, you can get yourself into some silly situations for clout, you know, because of your friends and you want to this, that, and the other. But as an adult, I never went looking for trouble ever as an adult. Never, never, ever, ever, ever. Only ever as a teenager did I ever start things and, you know, whatever. But as an adult, no, I was never trying to start nothing. Shout out to 1-1 for the super chat once again. Big up every time. Shout out to Mindsmith for the super chat. He says, do bouncers refuse entry to clapped guys? Well, bouncers refuse entry for all sorts of things. For all sorts of reasons, you know? If they don't like the look of you, for whatever reason, they're going to find some excuse not to let you in. They're going to say the club is full. They're going to say you don't have a girl with you. We're only letting guys in if they're accompanied by females. They're going to say that you don't meet the dress code. They're going to say that you look too drunk. It's really at the discretion of the bouncers. They're given instructions, obviously, by the managers in most cases. But it's at their discretion in terms of whether they let you in or not. And they'll come up with some excuse, you know. A shout out to Mindsmith for the super chat. Okay, Workstation says, I meant while working as a bouncer, did that affect your amateur boxing career while training or competing? It's a good question. I've never really thought about it. At the time, I don't think, you know, if it did, it's not something that I was aware of at the time. That's what I'll say. But it's possible that it did, because going around angry 24/7, ready to kick off, is actually draining. It drains you mentally and emotionally to be so wound up 24/7. Do you know what I mean? So maybe it did affect me. But at the time, I didn't think that it did, if that makes sense. Okay, Ramos says, do you think stereotypes are needed as a bouncer? Did you find it certain groups tend to start more trouble? Are stereotypes needed? You've obviously got to be careful, because some people might look a certain way, but they're actually okay. But I don't know what it's like now. Back when I was a bouncer, it was far less politically correct. You know, the bouncers would, the managers would tell you, don't let these type of people in, don't let those type of people in. They were quite explicit about it, you know, because it wasn't all the political correctness back then. And if they didn't want to be completely explicit, they would describe certain types of clothes, yeah, which certain groups would wear. So they say, don't let people that have these type of shoes on. At one point, in London anyway, a lot of clubs wouldn't let people in wearing Prada shoes. Because a lot of the road men and bad boys and whatever were all wearing the same Pradas. So certain clubs were like, yeah, see people wearing them Pradas, they're not coming in. So that was kind of a way of getting around stereotyping certain groups of people. You would more focus on the clothes because certain types of people do wear particular brands and what have you, or a particular clothing style. Henry says, Army squaddies back in the day were the craziest. I don't recall actually having any issue with squaddies, but we were told by many managers, by many clubs, don't let them in. I don't recall. I mean, I might have had issues with them not realizing they were squaddies, but generally, the people that work in these clubs, the managers, you know, the security team, all the bouncers, somebody will know whether a group of guys are squaddies or not, either before or after the fact. Because oftentimes when you get into a fight, when something kicks off, after other people have been ejected, other punters will come up to you and start telling you stuff about those guys, who they are. You know what I mean? Like sometimes girls will come up to you and say, oh yeah, these guys are from blah, blah, blah. That would happen a lot. But I don't recall actually getting into any fights that I was aware that these guys were squaddies. But yeah, we were told, don't let him in many places. Jay Jones says, back in the days, if the boys pull up in Averex jackets, you know it's a long one. I swear Averex jackets are making a comeback now. Anyway, peeps, gonna turn this one in, wrap this one up. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me once again. It's always good to talk to you guys. And a special shout out to everybody who donated via Super Chat. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Be good. I'll see you on the other side. I'm out.